Well, good evening. Thank you guys for joining us here in person and anyone joining online on our live stream. My name's Kirk, if I don't know you, one of the pastors here. And just want to welcome you. Maybe you were expecting, if you're online or you're here, you're expecting to see Tom Velasco, and I am not Tom Velasco, as you know. And that's because tonight we have a great opportunity, a special opportunity to have a preview of an event that's going to happen this weekend called Engaging Islam, and that's a conference we're holding here at Calvary Boise. And tonight we are having an event for just you guys for free. You don't have to go to the conference, but a little taste and preview of that. And so we're going to talk tonight with a special guest speaker named Dr. Jay Smith. And before we do, just want to set a few things out for you. First of all, tonight you'll have an opportunity at the end to ask some questions. And you can do that by going to our Slido event. And if you haven't used this, it's really simple. You can ask a question. I will be kind of monitoring those questions. And at the end, the last 15 or 20 minutes, I'll come up here with Dr. Smith and we'll have a discussion and you guys can ask your questions that way. So kind of a great opportunity to engage with the content tonight. I love those times where we get to engage with what we're learning and not just listen, but ask questions. And so without too much further ado, I'm going to invite Jay up, but let me tell you just a bit about him before he comes up. I first became aware of Dr. Smith when I was living in England, and he was down in London. I was up in Manchester, which is like 3 hours away. And we were reminiscing today about England and its beautiful curries and other Indian food and things like that. But Dr. Smith was known at that time for going to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, and he would go and engage and speak and preach to majority Muslim audiences. Right now, he is a teacher at Veritas Seminary. He has a PhD from a master's degree in Islamic Studies from Fuller Theological Seminary and a PhD from the Melbourne School of Theology, and teaches a master's of apologetics and polemics to Islam at the Veritas University in California. And so you're here to listen to Dr. Smith, and so why don't you help me invite him up right now and give him a hand as he comes up.
Great, thanks. Okay, am I on? Terrific. But this is the first time that I've actually got to know and understood how you all started. You were a bunch of woods, Boise, Le Bois, that I guess they were coming in over the mountains, and that's what Chris was telling me. And they saw some woods, and that's where you got your name from. Same experience I had coming in just now. It was all white, 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 lots of hills, and then suddenly a big reservoir, and our wheels went down, and then we landed in the only place that wasn't white. So, fun to be here. Terrific. I am not from America, though I sound American. I was born and grew up in India. And, of course, my background as a mishkid. My parents are missionaries. Grandparents are missionaries. All my 6 aunts and uncles were missionaries. Makes it easy for me to travel because almost every country I go to, someone knows my family. And it's terrific to be able to have that kind of background. But I grew up where most of the Muslims in India are. Now, you might be scratching your head and saying, hold on a minute, Muslims in India. It's not known as a Muslim country, is it? It's known as a Hindu country. And yet, it is the 3rd largest Muslim country on earth. After Indonesia, which has over 200 million. Second would be Pakistan, right next to India, which has almost 200,000. Some say probably 200 million, over 200 million. Then comes India, approaching 200 million Muslims. All in the north, where I lived and where I grew up. And then next door on the other side, Bangladesh is the 4th largest. Now, 3 of those countries used to be one country. Used to be India. Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Used to be India before 1947. And if you just take the Muslim populations from those 3 countries, you're talking about almost 600 million Muslims. That's a lot of Muslims. That's twice the population of your country, United States. And it's certainly the largest breakdown of Muslims anywhere in the world. The vast majority of Muslims are not in the Arab-speaking world. Let me repeat that. Arab-speaking Muslims only make up 15% of all Muslims. Arab-speaking Muslims from the Middle East who speak Arabic only make up 15%. The vast majority of the 1.8 billion to possibly 2 billion come from Asia. Asia. And that's where I grew up. And that's why I do what I do. I feel very comfortable with Islam. I do not have a fear of Islam. I don't fear Muslims. I love them. They're the most exciting people to be with. I find that they are the most engaging because they do what I do what they do. They love to confront. Ooh, do they love to confront. They are so aggressive for their God and their prophet and their book and their place. The book, the man, and the place. We aren't. And that's always a problem I've had in Europe especially. We were in Britain for 25 years. You were up in Manchester. Boo, hiss, we don't care about that city because he likes Manchester City. I'm a Chelsea fan, so we were sitting there, almost came to cuffs there in his car. He didn't almost want to bring me here because he was so angry about who I supported. This is the problem. I wish he would do that with Muslims, or not you specifically, but I wish as many British people would be as excited about evangelism as they are about their football team that they support. And don't they support their football teams? Boy, do they. And boy, are they religious. And boy, do they like to convert. But see, we don't do that in Europe. We don't do that in America. There's something about Islam that bothers us. There's something about Islam that scares us. Am I correct? There is a fear about Islam that I don't see anywhere else. I don't see it when you engage with Mormons, and you have lots of Mormons here. I saw their big tabernacle, quite impressive. Or Jehovah's Witnesses that come to your door, or your atheists or your humanists that you work with or that you went to school with. We're not at all timid about taking them on. But Islam? There's something about Islam that bothers us. We're going to unpack that more when we talk more this weekend, because I'm not going to answer that question tonight. That's not what I've been asked to do. This weekend I'm going to go in, start to look at that problem. What is it about Islam? Where is it that we have got this fear? Where did it come from? Why this fear of Islam? And why in the world does it still continue? And of course, what are the responses, the answers? What I've been asked to do tonight by Kirk is to look at the two books, these two right here. This is our book, the Bible. And this is their book, the Qur'an. Kirk, I didn't ask permission to bring this in here. Don't worry, it's not going to hurt anybody, especially after tonight. Okay? This is the book that they follow. This is the book that they believe is the eternal Qur'an. It has never been created. Oh, this one has, of course, because this is a book. It was printed. But the Qur'an, the proto-Qur'an, the archetype, that has always existed. And so when you look at these books, and what I'm going to do tonight, and Kirk has asked me to do this, is to look at these two books and do a comparison like with like, and then decide which is the better book. Well, already you can see which is the bigger book, right? There's a reason I always keep my Bibles bigger than my Quran, or my Quran smaller than my Bible, so that you know exactly which I think is the better. But to be able to do that, we're going to have to do some unpacking. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a comparison between these two books and show you just how great our Bible is compared to the Quran and how absolutely hopeless the Quran is. Now, some of what I'm going to say may disturb you. And those who are watching, especially if you're Muslims, you're not going to like what I'm going to say. But see, remember, I grew up amongst Muslims. I have no difficulty confronting this book. I don't like confronting Muslims. How can you confront people you love? But this book, I do not love this book because of what it does to Muslims. Because this is what they follow. This is the book that they have to adhere to. This is the book that tells them how to walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep, every area of life, 24/7. It is the Quran that is the basis for everything they do. Do we say that about the Bible? I would hope you say yes, but I know many of us don't. But certainly, Kirk, when you get up here and preach, and when the others on the staff, let me ask you all, when they get up here and preach, do they have a Bible in their hands? Please say yes. Do they open it and read it? Good, you've passed that test. Do they then apply it to your lives? Good. All right, well, this is a good biblical church. Some churches, I've asked that question, they just look at me blankly. They have probably not seen a Bible in their church for years. But that is the problem. We don't really apply this book like Muslims apply it. When I say Muslims apply it, I'm talking about the radical Muslims. I'm talking about the ones that are in Manchester, in London. We had huge numbers of them in England. I'm talking about those who actually read the Qur'an, who open it up. And when they read the Qur'an, when they open it up, and this is the difference. Let's start with the very first difference. They have a completely different presupposition that they start with. Every Muslim, if you're a radical Orthodox Muslim, if you're a Muslim that really follows Allah and follows Muhammad, then you would say that this book is eternal, uncreated. And it's not you that have made that. It's not because you like it. It's not because you've been told that. It's because the Quran says so. In chapter 85, verse 22, that's Surah and Ayah. Surah 85, Ayah 22. This is referred to as the preserved tablets, which means it has never been created. Now, already, some of you theologians are probably sitting there and scratching your head because you've always been told that there is only one God, right? That Islam starts from that premise, Ya la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. There's only one God but God. If God is only one and He is eternal, how can you have a book that's co-eternal with Him? There's a theological contradiction, isn't there? That's a problem in and of itself. I'm not going to solve that one tonight. We'll try to bring that up and show you the problem with that when we start on Friday and Saturday. But see, this book here also, it's not only that it is eternal, it is also preserved. So there is not one word, not one letter that has changed in this book. That's in chapter 10, verse 15, and that's in chapter 18, verse 27. So Surah 10, Ayah 15, and Surah 18, Ayah 27 says that not anybody, nobody, not even Muhammad, can change one word or one letter. Why? Well, for obvious reasons. If it's eternal, how can man have any interference in it? If it's eternal, then there cannot have any human intervention whatsoever, not even one word, not even one letter. And how is it that it's eternal and how is it preserved? In chapter 15, verse 9, Allah Himself preserves it. It's Allah Himself that will make sure that not one word, not one letter is changed. So these are the claims the Quran makes, not that Muslims have made up. This comes from the Quran itself. That's why the Muslims have to say that. Don't blame them. They're indoctrinated by their own Quran. Do we say that about our Bible? Is this eternal? No. Please don't say this is eternal. This is written by men. We know when it was written. We know who wrote it. We know where they wrote it. We know in what language they wrote it. We know that Matthew wrote Matthew, Mark wrote Mark, Jeremiah wrote Jeremiah, Isaiah wrote Isaiah, the first 5 books written by Moses. We know that, but these are men on earth who write these books down. Over a period of 1,400 years in 3 different languages on 3 different continents. So we know that this is not eternal. It's a book written by men. Men like you and me. Inspired by God. Do you see the difference? Not uncreated, but created by man, inspired by God. There is the difference. So we're starting from 2 different presuppositions. We do not start at the same point. Therefore, when you're discussing with Muslims, don't confuse yourself because the claims they make for the Quran, they try to impose them on the Bible. Do not let them do that. Mr. Smith, how can you have a book that is written by men? This book is not written by men. It is eternal. Immediately, you start to get defensive. Hold on a minute, so our book's not as good as theirs. Don't ever make the claims they make about the Quran. Because first of all, you're lying. And secondly, there's no way you can support it. So don't even try. This is not an eternal book. Has it changed? This book has not changed. Not one word, not one letter. How about this book? Yes, it has. Bingo. We don't make that claim either. We don't make either of those first two claims. Right away, you can see we're talking about two different books, aren't we? We're talking about two different presuppositions. We're starting from a completely different starting point. Has it been preserved? In fact, there are about 40 verses. If you open up, here in my NIV, when I open up to Mark chapter 16, verse 9 to 20, there's a line there that warns the reader that these verses between 9 and verse 20 are not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts. Now, it could be that these are the original texts. We don't know, because they're not there in the earliest Greek manuscripts. They're introduced in the Latin Vulgate later on. So, it warns the reader. John chapter 7, verse 53 to John chapter 8, verse 11, that story, the woman caught in adultery, that's also not in the earliest Greek manuscripts. And we warn the readers. We put a line before and after. We're very honest. We're transparent about it. We would never say, therefore, that it has not been changed. 1 John chapter 5, verse 7, the Trinitarian formula should not be there in verse 7 and 8. Sorry, verse 7. It should not be there. It was added in the 16th century. So we know where it's been changed. We know because we have such a wealth of manuscript evidence. So we would never make the claims that the Muslims make about the Qur'an. Not at all. Thank God we don't. Because the claims that the Qur'an makes for itself elevates this book so high that it's that much easier to bring down. We used to know, Kirk, people always said, why is it you only have these step ladders that we get on at Speaker's Corner? I get on step ladder, and I've been doing this since 1995. For 25 years, I would get up on a step ladder, so I just get above my head above the crowd, and it gives you an awful lot of authority, it gives you an awful lot of power, and you can pretty much control the discussion if you're on a step ladder. The problem is, people say, well, why don't you get a tall step ladder? I said, because I get knocked down quite a bit, and when I get knocked down, the higher I am, the further I have to fall. And that's exactly what the Muslims have done with this book, how this book has done with itself. It has elevated itself so high, eternality, uncreated, unchangeable, perfectly preserved by God Himself. See how high they've elevated it? That it makes my job so much easier. And more than that, I don't have to defend this book with those categories, because we don't create those categories. The book doesn't say that of itself, and we should not be saying that of the Bible. Let's move on. So we start from a different presupposition. What then about internally? Now, what I'm going to do, two things tonight. I'm going to look at the Quran specifically. I'm not going to talk too much about the Bible because you all know the Bible. I'm assuming you all know the Bible. You've been well trained by your leadership here. So everything I'm going to say tonight is mainly geared towards the Quran, but I'm going to demand the same thing of the Bible that I do of the Quran. So I'm going to do an internal investigation. That means opening up the Quran and just looking and reading its pages. And then I'm going to do external critique. That means looking at it historically. And that's by far the most damaging. You're going to love that part. In fact, I'm going to introduce some material here that none of you have heard before. There's only one man that's heard it, and he's standing right there, and his name is the only one that's heard what I'm going to say tonight, aren't you? Just say yes. Of course he is, because he's one of my students. So what we're going to do is internally. If you're starting internally, you need to open the Quran and read its pages. Now, I don't expect that many of you have read its pages because it's not something we teach in our schools. It's not something that you use in your classrooms. How many of you have a Quran sitting next to your bedside before you go to bed? You do? Boy, you raised your hand too quickly. Please don't do your devotions on the Quran, after tonight especially. But you do have a Quran. Okay, so there's one. Kirk, you own a Quran. Have you read it? Did it make sense to you? A little bit. So some of it did not make sense. Quite a bit of it did not make sense, right? Did it flow? Not really. Okay. Did one story follow another? No. Was there any complete stories? Just one. In the entire book of 6,236 verses, there's only one complete story. It's about the same size as our New Testament. 6,236 verses. The New Testament has 7,900, almost 8,000. So roughly about the same size as the New Testament. Now, let me ask all of you, does the Bible, is it easy to read? Can you read it in English? Say yes. Does it flow? Absolutely. Do the stories begin and end? And have one transition and follow a chronological events? Yes. And can you see God's redemption plan all the way from Genesis all the way to Revelation? Can you see then why we ask you to read the Bible? Because you can read it now, thank goodness you can read it in your own tongue, because everybody can read the Bible. It makes sense, but not the Quran. Even Kirk, you had a problem, didn't you? And you weren't reading in Arabic, you were reading in English. Even 25% of the Quran, the scholars don't understand. The scholars don't understand 25% of it. So already you're seeing, we're not talking about the same books. We're not talking about the same genre. The Quran you cannot read really, it goes all over the place. Look at chapter 2. It starts with one story, it jumps, you name it, it brings it in there. It's huge, all kinds of stories. None of them make any sense. None of them have anything to do with each other. It's ulta pulta, as we say in Hindi. All completely confusing. And that's why it suggests to me, this is not from God. This has no inspiration whatsoever. It's as man-made a book as you can find. More than that, as we're going to see when I get into the external evidence, it's been borrowed from many different sources without even thinking through what those sources are, or where they came from, or what they mean. So what we're going to do when you look at that, let's look at some other problems. When you look at the internals, let's look at the contradictions. When you look at the Bible, are there contradictions in the Bible? You're sure, Kirk? You said that very quickly. You're sure there are no contradictions? Back in 1997, I was debating. I love to do debates, and I debate a lot of Muslim scholars. And I was debating Dr. Shabir Ali, considered to be the world's leading debater in the Muslim world. We were debating at Birmingham University, and it was going to be the Bible versus the Quran, 1997. So we're talking a good over 20 years ago. And he handed me a book called 101 Clear Contradictions in the Bible. Handed it to me right before the debate. Said, Jay, I want you to answer this. Well, I said, I'm not going to do it now, but give me about a year. Let me go and take it home. And so the next year we had another debate on the Bible and the Quran at Leicester University, and I handed him back 101 cleared up contradictions of the Bible. 101 cleared up contradictions of the Bible. And you are correct. What we found is all the way through, what Dr. Shabir Ali and his team had done is they were looking at all these seeming contradictions in the Bible. They were looking at a name here that had changed over here. They were looking at a verse here, but they didn't read the rest of the verse. We found they made 15 different errors all the way through in their construction of these contradictions. They didn't understand the numerals, the Hebrew number system. They weren't even aware of the way that you can have names can certainly change, how, especially place names can change, the way they're spelled. But more than that, they didn't look at the sequence of the Bible. 101 cleared up contradictions of the Bible. And then I went to the Quran. I said, well, I'm going to do the same thing to the Quran. I didn't have to look very far because this has been done by many people. And we found contradiction after contradiction after contradiction. There were scientific contradictions. Oh, there is numerical contradictions. You know, how many days was the earth created? Was it created in 6 days according to chapter 7 of the Quran? Or was it created in 8 days according to chapter 41 of the Quran? Well, that is probably a very difficult contradiction, because that you cannot say is progressive revelation, because that's usually the comeback that most Muslims give whenever you have a contradiction. It's just because God is saying something here and then he's saying something here for another people at a different age. That's called progressive revelation. They borrowed it from us because we do that with the Old and New Testament. But you can't do that with contradictions, internal contradictions. How many wings does an angel have? All these different contradictions. In fact, the law of contradiction is introduced into the Quran itself. When you look at chapter 2, verse 106, and chapter 16, verse 101 in the Quran, it says that is something that we give, mansuk, we give something better, nasik. So that verse that we give here, it's called mansuk, which is weak. We give something better, nasik, which is strong. We abrogate it. The law of abrogation is built into the Quran. Why? Because there are over 500 contradictions in the Quran. I've tabulated 225 that I have in my paper alone. I think we gave that to you in the class. The Quran is full of contradictions, and the reason it's full of contradiction is because it's borrowed from men, written by men, has nothing to do with Allah, is not preserved. But I'm kind of jumping the gun on that. Well, also there are an enormous amount of errors built into the Quran. Let's look at the errors. In chapter 31 of the Quran, it says that God placed mountains on earth to keep them from shaking, as tent pegs to keep them from shaking. Now, I was born and grew up in the Himalaya mountains in India, northern India, the largest mountains in the world. And the whole time that I was living in the Himalaya mountains at 7,000 feet, we had earthquakes all the time, shaking all the time. And if you were a man who didn't know science, you would probably think, yes, that's why this mountain is here, because this is a place that shakes an awful lot. Therefore, God put these huge mountains here called the Himalaya Mountains to keep the earth from shaking. Well, it wasn't doing a very good job because it was shaking and shaking and shaking. And the reason why we now know is because the Indian plate was jamming up against the Tibetan plate, and where it came together, it was causing a wrinkle in the earth's surface, and that created the mountain range called the Himalayas. In fact, it's still growing. Did you know that? The Himalayan mountains is still growing about the length of a fingernail every year. Not very fast, no, that's true, but as you put all that pressure along these two plates, they start to move and they start to jiggle, and there is all kinds of earthquakes. Whenever anybody wanted to build a house there in our area in Masuri where we lived, they would have to create a plane. They have to dig out a plane, a flat area, and have all these kind of pushed to these walls, and then they had to let it sit for 10 years. Because if it lasted 10 years of earthquakes, then it was stable enough to build a house on top. That's how the law goes. So I know from first-hand evidence that the mountains were not there to keep the earth from shaking. The mountains were there because of the shaking. It's just the opposite. But see, a pre-scientific someone writing this in the 7th century, if it was written in the 7th century, wouldn't know any difference. Wouldn't know any difference. And this is repeated over and over again. It's not just in chapter 31. This is also found in chapter 78, verse 6 to 7. Here's some good ones. Did you know, according to the Quran, that the semen is created from the back, from your kidneys? Did you know that? I had no idea. I wasn't taught that in school. That the semen comes from kidneys? Or that milk from the cow comes from its excrement? Oh dear, and I've been drinking all these years. How about this? That the honeybees... The honeybee, the beautiful honey that you eat every day comes from the abdomen of a bee. I had no idea. I've been told that it comes from the comb, honeycomb. There's nothing in. I'm glad we're not eating what's coming out of the honeybee's abdomen. And that there are 7 earths and 7 heavens, according to chapter 65, verse 12. I always thought there was 1 earth. What about the 7 heavens? I think that's Dante's Inferno, isn't it? Looks like they've borrowed it from that source. Oh, it goes on. There are so many I have listed here. I'm not going to go into all of them because otherwise, here I'm going to end with this one. In chapter 37, it says, and also in chapter 72, that the meteorites that you see at nighttime, you go out and you see these meteorites, zoom, these shooting stars that go across the heavens. Those are going across the heavens to chase the jinn. These are these beings, these kind of benevolent or malevolent beings that are trying to listen to the Quran being recited in heaven. And so these are to chase them away, to chase them away. Now, do you see a problem with that, folks? Jinn are not material. They're immaterial. You can't see them. But aren't meteorites made out of material? Nickel, cadmium, most of them, different types of rock and many types of metal, right? So how can material zips things that go across the earth chase jinn that are immaterial listening to the Quran that's recited in heaven? Because those are in our atmosphere. Is heaven in our atmosphere? Can you see all kinds of problems with this? But of course, if you're pre-scientific and you see these things shooting across the star, that's what you would come up with. And then in chapter 36, and I'll end with this one, in chapter 91, it says that the moon and the sun, they're in an orbit around the earth, and that the sun is chasing the moon. It follows the moon whenever it goes around. Now, pre-scientific man would come to that conclusion, but not today. And certainly Allah would not make that mistake. If this is an eternal Quran that exists eternally, why is it you find mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake? And I've just given you a few examples just to show you what we now do. And now we come to relevancy. When you look at the Quran and you ask, is this a book that's relevant for today? Ooh, I could spend all hour on this one. Let me just choose two areas. You women, look at you. What's your name? Michelle, I'm going to use you as a woman. You are a woman, so of course that's not a hard thing to do. I want you to hear this and see what you think. If you're talking to a Muslim woman, these are the verses you need to give her. I see you're writing these down, so you can write these down. I'm going to give you just about 7 verses from 2 chapters and see if these are relevant for you as a woman, okay? Take them personally and see what you think. In chapter 4, verse 3, it says that a man can have up to 4 wives. How do you feel about that? Okay, you'd rather the other way around, that you'd have 4 husbands. Remember, every man has a mother-in-law that comes with him. Okay, so and obviously that's inequality in marriage, right? Okay, you go a few verses later in chapter 4, verse 11, when your father died, if he did, and you and your brothers, if you have brothers, the inheritance from his death, you would get half the inheritance of your brothers. Do you like that? Okay, so number 2, you don't like, it's inequality in marriage, inequality in death. A few verses later in verse 24 of chapter 4, it says that a man, beyond the 3-4 wives that he has, when he is going on a trip or when he is in warfare, he can have as many of these women that his right hand possesseth. That means slaves of war, female slaves of war, as many as he wants. These are called concubines. How does that make you feel as a wife? Not good. So already you're seeing, you're getting diminished and diminished and diminished. Are you not feeling that? And then in 10 verses later, verse 34, it says that a man controls his wife, but if the wife stands against her husband, he can admonish her first, naughty, naughty, don't do it again. If that doesn't work, he can throw her from the bed. And if that doesn't work, he can beat her. Daraba. Daraba means to scourge in Arabic. How does that make you feel? So I've just given you 4 verses. Are you not agreed with any one of these 4? No, let's go to chapter 2, verse 282, where it says that in court, the testimony of a man is equal to 2 women. So in other words, you have half the testimony of a man. You need to have 2 women to agree upon it against 1 man. And the reason why, when Aisha, the favorite wife of Muhammad, asked him why this is so, Muhammad said because women are less intelligent and also more disobedient. How do you feel about that? You're not liking this, are you? Have you heard these verses before? Isn't this interesting? And most Muslims have not heard these verses. It gets worse. We're still in chapter 2, verse 223. In chapter 2, verse 223, it says that a wife is a tilth for her husband, and that the husband can plow his wife sexually anytime he wants. That's called marital rape. Horrendous. And I have never seen a Muslim that can answer me whenever we've brought it up. They usually change the subject. But here's the worst one. In chapter 2, verse 230, remember I said that a man can have up to 4 wives, right? He can also divorce them. According to chapter 2, verse 230, all he needs to say is talak, talak, talak 3 times. I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you in Arabic. She's divorced. She has to leave the household. Now, the very next day, let's just say the next day, when the man wakes up and he realizes he didn't want to divorce his wife, he misses his breakfast, he wants to have her back. She cannot come back. According to chapter 2, verse 230, she cannot come back until she goes down to the mosque, goes into where the imam is, who has a bed in an antechamber, has to have sex with the imam, has to have penetrative sex with the imam, and then come out, and the imam then has to write a certificate of divorce before she can return to her husband, and she has to pay the imam, in England right now, it's £1,500, which is about $1,800. Have you heard this before? This is called halal marriages. Halal marriages. It's right there in black and white in the Quran, in chapter 2, verse 230. Is that relevant for today? Is that relevant for you, a woman? Absolutely not. And this is why you need to read the Qur'an, folks. Muslims need to. Are you listening, Muslims? Those who are watching, you need to read the Qur'an, and you need to tell me how that could be relevant for me. Thank God for the Bible. Thank God for Jesus. Are we permitted to beat our wives? Ephesians 5:25. We are to love our wives as much as Christ loved the church. And as Christ was willing to die for the church, we husbands have to be willing to die for our wives. 1 Corinthians 7, the entire chapter is about marriage. How that the husband's body is equal to the woman's body. Thank God we have that there. As far as equality is concerned, there is no difference between man or woman, Jew or Greek, slave or free. All are equal in Jesus Christ. Thank God for Jesus. And what about the testimony of a woman? Remember, the greatest event in the history of mankind, the greatest event, the resurrection of God from the dead. Who did Jesus show himself to? You think it would be his disciples who ran there to find him, right? It was to a woman, a sinful woman, he showed himself to. Knowing that in first century Judaism, the testimony of a woman was half of that of a man, yet he chose to show himself to a woman. And there, when he was on his way to Bethany, the second time that he showed himself was to a group of women on their way to Bethany. Remember Mary and Martha? Martha was in the kitchen, Mary was at Jesus' feet, sitting at the feet of a rabbi, unheard of in Judaism. Women do not sit at a rabbi's feet. Martha comes and says, come on, Mary, come and help me here. And what did Jesus say? No. Martha, you go there, Mary, you stay right where you are. Jesus was turning 1,000 years of tradition on its head right there. That's my Jesus. Ooh, I love what he does with women. See, that's relevant, is it not, Michelle? That is relevant for today. And you like those examples, don't you? We have nothing like marital rape and the divorce categories, these halal marriages, these muta marriages, these temporary marriages just don't exist in our scriptures. Now, we get to the really heavy material. This is my bread and butter. This is what I love. This is what I did my doctoral thesis on. And I could go for another 2 hours, so don't let me. So what I'm going to do is try to really truncate this to get it down. And I'm going to talk about the manuscript evidence first. When you look at the Quran, you need to start asking some historical questions. All I've done so far for these first few minutes, I've just looked at the internal. I've just looked at the Quran as it is, what it says, whether or not it's relevant. I didn't even you notice I stayed away from the violent verses, because I could have gone into a lot of violent verses, like chapter 9, verse 5, slay the unbeliever wherever ye find them, lay in wait for them for every kind of ambush. I could have gone to that verse. I could have gone to John chapter 9, verse 29, make war on the people of the book, the Christians and the Jews, that's us. I could have gone to chapter 8, verse 39, slay the unbeliever until there is no more fitna, no more unbelief in the land. I could have gone to chapter 47, verse 4, which says to cut off the heads of the unbeliever. Ooh, I could have gone to 149 of these verses in the Quran. Violent verses. But I didn't. Because I want to get into the historical material. See, this is really, I think, the Achilles heel of Islam.